I met Kyle at Sarah's 25th birthday party on a humid Saturday night in July. The bar was packed, music too loud, and I was wearing this emerald green dress that made my eyes pop. I'd been single for 3 months after dumping my ex for being clingy, and I wasn't really looking for anything serious. Kyle wasn't my usual type. He was quieter than the guys I normally went for, standing near the bar, nursing a beer, while everyone else was getting wasted and dancing badly to pop music. He approached me while I was waiting for a drink, and instead of some cheesy pickup line, he just smiled and said, "That color looks good on you." Simple, direct, genuine. There was something about the way he said it, like he really meant it instead of just trying to get in my pants. We ended up talking for 2 hours straight, and I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it. Kyle actually listened when I spoke, not just waiting for his turn to talk, but really paying attention to what I was saying. It was refreshing after dating guys who only wanted to talk about themselves. The first 8 months with Kyle were honestly pretty great. He had this calm energy that I found soothing at first. While other guys I dated were either too intense or completely flaky, Kyle was consistent. He showed up when he said he would, remembered things I told him, and never played those stupid games that most men seem to think are attractive. He was 26, had a good job in finance, and owned his own place. On paper, he was exactly what I should want, but there was something about his predictability that started to feel suffocating. Kyle was the kind of guy who planned everything. Our dates, our weekend trips, even what we'd watch on Netflix. He never surprised me, never did anything spontaneous. It was like dating a really sweet robot who'd been programmed to be the perfect boyfriend. I started feeling restless, like I was missing out on something more exciting. That's when Marcus happened. I met him at a work conference, and he was everything Kyle wasn't. Spontaneous, charming, a little dangerous. He flirted with me shamelessly during the networking events, and I found myself flirting back. It felt thrilling to have someone look at me like I was the most fascinating woman in the room. Kyle looked at me like I was comfortable, familiar. Marcus looked at me like I was a prize he wanted to win. The night before the conference ended, I slept with him. It was stupid and impulsive, and I regretted it immediately afterward. Marcus was mediocre in bed and spent the entire time talking about himself. The whole thing lasted maybe 20 minutes and left me feeling empty and guilty. It meant absolutely nothing. Just a moment of weakness when I let my ego get the better of me. I flew home the next day and decided to pretend it never happened. Kyle picked me up from the airport with flowers and asked how the conference went. I looked at his kind, trusting face and felt sick with guilt. But I also felt annoyed that he was being so sweet when I was feeling so terrible. If he'd been paying better attention to me, maybe I wouldn't have been so susceptible to Marcus's attention in the first place. I convinced myself that this was partly Kyle's fault for being so complacent about our relationship. 4 months later, I was late. At first I told myself it was just stress from work. But when I was a full week late, I bought a pregnancy test, sitting on my bathroom floor at 6 in the morning. Staring at those 2 pink lines, I felt my entire world shift. The first thing I thought wasn't about the baby or Kyle or our future together. The first thing I thought was about timing. I tried to calculate backwards, counting days and weeks, trying to figure out if the timing would work. Kyle and I had been together for almost a year by then, and we were having sex regularly. The conference was 4 months ago. It had to be Kyle's. It had to be. I said a prayer to whoever might be listening that the math would work out in my favor. When I told Kyle, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled me into his arms and said we'd figure it out together. He didn't propose right away, but he started talking about our future, like it was a given. Within a month, he'd asked me to move in with him. Within 2 months, we were planning a small wedding. Kyle stepped up in every way possible, and I told myself that the timing worked out. So everything was fine. I pushed any doubts out of my mind and focused on being grateful for having such a supportive partner. Jason was born healthy and perfect. And Kyle was an amazing father from day one. He got up for night feedings, changed diapers without complaining, and talked to Jason like he was the most important person in the world. Watching them together, I felt a mix of love and relief. Kyle adored Jason, and Jason looked exactly like Kyle's baby photos that his mother showed me. Everything had worked out exactly like it was supposed to. The next 6 years fell into a comfortable routine. Kyle worked, I took care of Jason, and eventually went back to work part-time. And we settled into domestic life. Kyle's best friend, Cameron, was over constantly. They'd been friends since elementary school, and Jason called him Uncle Cam. Cameron was everything Kyle wasn't. Loud, funny, spontaneous, always ready with a joke or an adventure. He brought out a different side of Kyle, and I loved watching them together. But as the years went by, I started feeling invisible again. Kyle was a wonderful father and a reliable husband, but he wasn't particularly romantic anymore. We fell into patterns: work, dinner, Jason's activities, bed, Kyle seemed perfectly content with our routine, but I felt like I was disappearing into it. I was only 29, but I felt like I was already becoming one of those suburban moms who existed solely to manage everyone else's needs. Cameron noticed my restlessness before Kyle did. He started making little comments about how I seemed tired, asking if Kyle was taking good enough care of me. At first it seemed like friendly concern, but gradually it became something more. Cameron would text me during the day, just casual conversation at first, but then more personal things. He'd tell me I looked nice when Kyle didn't notice a new haircut. He'd bring me coffee when he came over, remembering exactly how I liked it when Kyle would just grab whatever was easiest. I knew it was inappropriate, but it felt so good to have someone really see me again. Cameron made me feel like I was still a person worth paying attention to, not just Kyle's wife and Jason's mom. When Cameron started suggesting we grab lunch sometime, just the two of us, I knew I should say no. Instead, I said yes. Our first lunch was innocent enough, just two friends catching up. But there was an undercurrent of something else, something exciting and forbidden. Cameron told me he'd always thought Kyle didn't appreciate me enough, that I deserved someone who would worship me the way I deserved to be worshipped. It was exactly what I wanted to hear, even though I knew it was wrong. The affair with Cameron started gradually. First, it was just lunch dates and long text conversations. Then it was meeting for coffee. Then drinks. Cameron made me feel alive again, like I was worth pursuing. He was Kyle's best friend, which made it feel even more thrilling and dangerous. We both knew it was terrible, but that almost made it more exciting. I justified it by telling myself I was using the guilt from Marcus to escape into something that felt good. I'd carried that secret for over a year, and it was eating at me. Being with Cameron felt like a way to forget about that mistake, even though logically I knew I was just making everything worse. But Cameron made me feel desirable and special, and I was addicted to that feeling. For over a year, I managed to keep everything separate. Kyle had no idea. Jason was happy, and Cameron and I were careful. I felt guilty sometimes, but mostly I felt excited. I had my stable life with Kyle and my passionate secret life with Cameron. It felt like I was finally getting everything I needed. When Jason turned 6, Kyle signed him up for Pee Wee football. I volunteered to be the team mom because it seemed like the kind of thing a good mother would do. And honestly, I enjoyed the attention. All the other parents knew me as the organized, helpful one who coordinated snacks and team events. It felt good to be appreciated and needed. Coach Damon was new to the league, recently divorced, and definitely attractive. He was probably 40, with graying temples and this confident way of moving that reminded me of Marcus. At first, our interactions were completely appropriate, just coordinating team activities and discussing Jason's progress. But I noticed the way he looked at me, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy it. Kyle would come to Jason's games after work, still wearing his suit, and cheer from the sidelines. "Let's go, Jay," he'd call out, and Jason would beam and wave. Kyle was a good father, but he was also predictable. He'd sit in the same spot, cheer at the same moments, and make small talk with the same parents every week. Meanwhile, Coach Damon would catch my eye and smile, making me feel like we shared some kind of secret. It started with texting about team logistics, but gradually became more personal. Coach Damon, he insisted I call him just Damon, would compliment my organization skills, then my outfit, then just me in general. He made me feel competent and attractive, which was intoxicating. I found myself looking forward to his messages and taking extra care with my appearance on game days. I was still seeing Cameron regularly, but Damon felt different. Cameron was familiar, safe in his own dangerous way. Damon was completely new territory. When he suggested we grab coffee to discuss team fundraising ideas, I knew it wasn't really about fundraising. I also knew I was going to say yes. Our first coffee meeting was electric. Damon was charming and funny, and he made me feel like the most interesting woman he'd ever met. He told me his ex-wife had never appreciated him, that she'd taken him for granted. I found myself sharing more than I should have about feeling unappreciated at home. We talked for 2 hours, and by the end, I knew we were going to sleep together. It was just a matter of when. The physical affair with Damon started a few weeks later. I told Kyle I was meeting with other team parents to plan the end-of-season party, and instead I met Damon at a hotel 20 minutes away. The sex was incredible, passionate and desperate in a way that reminded me why I'd been so attracted to excitement in the first place. Damon made me feel like a goddess, telling me how amazing I was, how he couldn't stop thinking about me. For a few weeks, I felt like I was living in some kind of dream. I had Kyle's stability, Cameron's emotional connection, and Damon's passion. I was getting everything I wanted from different people, and I felt more alive than I had in years. I managed to keep all 3 relationships in separate boxes, and I was proud of how well I was handling everything. But Damon got careless. He started making comments at practices that were just a little too familiar. standing a little too close when other parents were around. I tried to tell him we needed to be more discreet, but he just laughed and said no one suspected anything. He was cocky about it, like our affair was some kind of conquest he wanted people to know about. I should have ended it then, but I was addicted to how he made me feel. When we were together, I felt like the most desirable woman alive. When I was home with Kyle, making dinner and helping Jason with homework, I felt invisible again. The contrast made Kyle's quiet consistency feel even more boring than before. Everything fell apart on a Tuesday. I was at home, making Jason's lunch for school the next day, when he came running through the front door in tears. Kyle was right behind him, looking confused and concerned. Jason threw himself into my arms, sobbing, and I could barely understand what he was saying. Why are they saying you're a cheater? Mom? He finally managed to get out between sobs. Tommy's dad said you're a cheater, and that's why Coach Damon likes you so much. My blood went cold. I looked over Jason's head at Kyle, who was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Jason kept crying, telling me what the other kids had said at practice. Apparently Damon had been bragging to one of the other fathers, and word had spread through the entire football community like wildfire. Tommy said his dad said that your mom's the team mom for everyone, and Coach is your real dad, not Mr. Mitchell. Jason sobbed. I felt like I was going to throw up. Kyle's face had gone completely pale, and he was looking at me like he was seeing me for the first time. I knew I needed to do damage control immediately. Don't you dare question our son like that, I snapped at Kyle, even though he hadn't said anything. Jason? Honey, kids say mean things sometimes. Tommy's dad is just jealous because I'm better at organizing than his mom is. But Kyle wasn't buying it. After I got Jason calmed down and settled in his room, Kyle came into the kitchen where I was aggressively washing dishes. Trying to look normal? Is there something you want to tell me? He asked quietly. The way he said it made my skin crawl. He sounded so calm, so reasonable, like he was asking about the weather, instead of potentially destroying our entire family. I wanted to scream at him for being so controlled when our world was falling apart. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, not looking at him. I think you do, Kyle replied. I found your phone earlier when you were putting Jason to bed. My stomach dropped. I'd been sloppy with my messages to Damon, thinking Kyle would never look. Kyle wasn't the suspicious type. He'd always trusted me completely. The fact that he'd gone through my phone meant he already knew everything. I turned around to face him, ready to fight. But Kyle just looked tired. Not angry, not hurt, just exhausted, like I'd been slowly draining the life out of him for years. I'm done, he said simply, and walked out of the kitchen. That night, Kyle slept in the guest room. The next morning, he took Jason to school, but he didn't come home afterward. When Jason asked where Daddy was at dinner, I told him Daddy was working late, but Kyle didn't come home that night either, or the night after that. 3 days later, Kyle showed up while Jason was at school to pack his things. He moved through the house methodically, taking his clothes, his books, his personal items. He didn't take any of the furniture or decorations we'd bought together. It was like he was erasing himself from our life as cleanly as possible. Where are you going to stay? I asked, following him around like a lost puppy. I found a place, he said without looking at me. What about Jason? You can't just abandon him because you're mad at me. Kyle stopped packing and looked at me directly for the first time in days. I'm not abandoning Jason. I'm leaving you. 2 weeks later, I was served with divorce papers. Along with the legal documents was a manila envelope containing paternity test results. Kyle had taken Jason for what he told our son was just a science test while I was at work. The results showed what I'd been terrified of for over 6 years. Kyle wasn't Jason's biological father. I felt violated and betrayed that Kyle had gone behind my back to test Jason. How dare he question our son's paternity without even talking to me first? I wanted to call a lawyer and see if I could get Kyle in trouble for taking Jason for medical tests without my permission. The fact that he'd been so sneaky about it made me feel like the victim in all of this. Damon completely disappeared after the scandal broke. He wouldn't return my calls or texts, and I heard through the football community grapevine that he'd quit coaching and moved back to his hometown. Apparently, bragging about sleeping with a married mother had seemed like a good idea until it actually ruined his reputation too. I felt used and abandoned, like I'd just been some conquest he could brag about to his buddies. Cameron stopped contacting me entirely once Kyle moved out. I tried calling and texting him, desperate for some kind of support, but he never responded. I found out later that Kyle had told Cameron everything, and their 20-plus year friendship was over. Cameron chose Kyle, which shouldn't have surprised me but somehow did. I'd thought what we had meant more to him than that. The social consequences were brutal. The football parents wouldn't look at me or speak to me beyond basic politeness. I had to pull Jason out of his school because kids were teasing him about having a cheating mom. My own family barely spoke to me. My sister let me stay with her temporarily, but she was cold and judgmental the entire time. My parents were disappointed and embarrassed, especially when people in their social circle started asking questions. Kyle handled the divorce with the same quiet efficiency he'd handled everything else in our relationship. He didn't fight me on custody, but he also didn't fight for it. Through his lawyer, he sent a message saying he would always be in Jason's life if Jason wanted him to be, just not through me. He arranged to pick Jason up directly from school for their visits, so we wouldn't have to see each other. True to his word, Kyle maintained a relationship with Jason. He picked him up twice a month for weekend visits, took him to baseball games and movies, and never said a negative word about me. Jason would come home from these visits happy but confused, asking why Kyle didn't live with us anymore if he still loved Jason. I didn't know how to explain that Kyle left because of me, not because of Jason. The practical consequences were overwhelming. I couldn't afford the house on my own, so I had to move into a small 2-bedroom apartment. I couldn't afford therapy for more than a few sessions, even though I probably needed it. I was working full-time but still struggling financially. Jason was acting out at his new school, confused and angry about all the changes in his life. I felt completely alone and abandoned. Everyone acted like I was some kind of monster, but really, Kyle was the one who'd given up on our family. He was the one who'd chosen to leave instead of working things out. Yes, I'd made some mistakes, but marriages were supposed to survive rough patches. Kyle had just decided our entire life together wasn't worth fighting for. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Cameron at the grocery store. I was in the cereal aisle, trying to decide between name brand and store brand everything because money was tight. When I heard someone say "hey" behind me, I turned around and there he was, looking exactly the same except maybe a little tired around the eyes. We stared at each other for a long moment, and I felt all the old attraction come flooding back. Cameron had been my escape, my excitement, my proof that I was still worth wanting. "Hey," I said back. We didn't say much else that day, but we exchanged numbers again. Within a week, we were texting. Within a month, we were meeting for coffee. Cameron told me he'd missed me, that ending things had been the hardest thing he'd ever done. He said Kyle had been devastated about losing both me and his best friend, but that their friendship couldn't survive what we'd done. I knew getting involved with Cameron again was probably the worst possible decision I could make. He was still Kyle's former best friend, still the person who'd helped destroy my marriage. Being with him meant I was choosing the excitement and drama that had ruined my life in the first place. But Cameron made me feel wanted again, and I was so tired of feeling invisible and alone. When we were together, I could forget about my cramped apartment and my financial struggles and Jason's behavioral problems at school. Cameron reminded me that I was still attractive, still worth pursuing, still capable of making someone happy. We've been seeing each other secretly for a few months now. I know it's destructive and stupid, and probably guaranteeing that I'll never be able to move forward with my life. I know that if Kyle found out, it would probably end any chance of our family ever healing. I know that I'm repeating the same patterns that destroyed everything good in my life. But I also know that I can't seem to stop myself. Cameron texts me good morning every day and tells me I'm beautiful and makes me feel like I matter. When I'm with him, I remember who I used to be before I became just another struggling single mom. He makes me feel alive in a way that stability and routine never could. Jason still asks about Kyle constantly. He wants to know why Kyle can't come to his school events, why we can't all have dinner together anymore, why everything had to change. I tell him that sometimes grown-ups have problems they can't fix, but I can see that he blames himself somehow. He started having nightmares and his grades are slipping, but I can't afford more therapy sessions and I don't know how else to help him. Kyle sends child support payments on time every month and never misses his scheduled visits with Jason. He's dating someone new now, I found out through mutual acquaintances. And apparently she's nice and stable, and everything. I never was. Jason likes her, which makes me feel jealous and replaced, even though I know I have no right to feel that way. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd just been satisfied with what I had. Kyle was a good husband and father, and our life together was comfortable and secure. Maybe if I'd tried harder to appreciate his quiet consistency instead of craving excitement and drama, we could have made it work. Maybe if I'd been honest about my restlessness instead of seeking attention elsewhere, we could have found ways to reconnect. But then Cameron calls, and I remember how good it feels to be wanted. And I push those thoughts away. I tell myself that Kyle gave up too easily, that he should have fought harder for our marriage. I tell myself that everyone makes mistakes, and mine weren't really that different from what lots of people do. I tell myself that I deserve to be happy, even if my happiness comes at a cost. I know that seeing Cameron again probably means I haven't learned anything from losing Kyle and destroying my family. I know it means I'm choosing the same patterns that led to disaster before. But when Cameron looks at me like I'm the most fascinating woman in the world, I can't bring myself to care about the consequences. After all, I've already lost everything that mattered. What's left to destroy?